So, guys, good morning. I want to review AEW Dynamite, and unfortunately, it was a very, very bad show, and I actually gave it a 2 out of 5. And, what I would say is that, the big issue is that, a lot of the matches were predictable. And what that means is that you know who's going to win and who's going to lose. And when you have matches like that, it doesn't matter if it's a 50-50 between two wrestlers, it's still just not watchable really because if I'm going to see Brian Cage and Will Ospreay be 50-50 with each other and I know that Brian Cage is going to lose every single time he's out there, why would I watch that match really? If you had something like, okay, Kyle Fletcher versus Kenny Omega, and then he beat Kenny Omega, then Fletcher beats Omega legitimately, you would have a better programming. Or you say something like, okay, well, Brian Cage is going to beat Will Ospreay, so there's some doubt or something like that. So it elevates Brian Cage, that would be kind of good, really. So they had a lot of matches where you knew who was going to lose. The other big issue about the show is the main event. And with the main event, I did not even watch it. You have Mercedes Moné and Yuka Sakazaki, if I'm saying correctly. So again, why would I want to watch that? Because most people don't know who Yuka is. You haven't done a great job setting her up. She's one of those wrestlers that more than likely she wrestles in other companies for a long time. She occasionally shows up in WWE and on AEW. And do I actually really want to watch that match? Because she's not going to win. If you gave me Saraya versus Mercedes Moné, or you gave me someone who could actually talk and be a character and be charismatic, I think then you would actually have something that would compel me. And I think the third cardinal sin before I start my review is that they didn't build up to any matches at Grand Slam. You need to treat this like a big deal. I understand what AEW did. They did not sell out the Suncorp Arena. They did not get a good quota. So they decided to go to a small arena, and I don't think they're getting a good quota for that, really. So they're probably going to say, well, we're going to count our losses, save all the matches for AEW Revolution, and treat that more of a big deal, really. And this is going to be like a filler show. So I just feel that that's not good. That's a bad decision. They need to have strong shows. They need to be very compelling. They need to work on their weaknesses. So they were at the Von Braun Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and I'm looking at my notes. So they sold an estimate of 2,100 tickets. It was a 2,400 setup, so automatically that's 88%, which is good out of their setup. However, the arena goes from 6,700 to 8,300 people, really. So you can honestly say, for the maximum capacity, it was either between they got 33%, around 33%, and that's not good really. But when I look at the show, I'm not that surprised. So I'm going to go over all the matches of the show and tell you why I didn't like the show. And then I'm also going to give you a bunch of improvements. Will Ospreay versus Brian Cage. It opens with them showing Kenny Omega being tagged on screen. This causes a distraction. Brian Cage hits Ospreay from behind. They tease the sixth member. I'm actually excited for this. There may actually be Team Omega and Ospreay versus Team Don Callis really at AEW Double or Nothing, when I think you do stronger with Raid FTR, with Hobbs and Anthony Bowens in that versus the Death Riders. So I think that's one thing I'm a little worried about, Double or Nothing. Are they actually going to say, okay, we're giving you an extra member because we want to set up Team Omega versus, the Don Callis family? So they did their weekly, violation of the 10 count. They went outside the ring for more than 10 seconds. That makes them look amateur and professional. Every wrestling company says you can't go out of the ring for more than 10 seconds outside of certain match types. You have to do that in your regular matches, but they just do that way too much. That's an issue of this company. Brian Cage catches Ospreay and carries him in a vertical suplex type of pose all the way to the announce table area. That looked really cool. Good feat of strength. Don Callis hits Ospreay from behind. The referee's back. Good heel heat, but he does this all the time, really. It doesn't stand out. Brian Cage is very dominant in this match. And like I said, it doesn't matter to me that he's dominant on Will Ospreay. If he actually beats Will Ospreay, it's going to really matter and really pop me because that's something unexpected, really. We all know that in a Brian Cage match, over 90% of the time, who better? Everybody's better than Cage because he always loses. Um, so the so I also noticed I was a little confused because the announcer through the majority of the match, they were not announcing any of the Will Ospreay moves. That it seemed like maybe like 2/3 into the match, like 66% of the match, like the last 33% of the match, they actually started to announce the moves that Will Ospreay does. So that felt a little like jarring. So Ospreay does off the ropes corkscrew kick. He does a top board springboard or elbow strike. Ospreay does a Suzuki special, which always pops the crowd. I like that. Where he does a backflip into like a handstand, and then it flies out of the ring. So that looks really cool. I like the combination Brian Cage did: a discus elbow, lariat, and Liger bomb. And as I said, imagine what would have happened if Brian Cage was holding the ROH championship. What would happen if he was holding a singles title like the TNT championship, or he was still holding the ROH, like television title, whatever that title Commander is holding. He was actually wearing it, and he actually had an undefeated streak where he was being a bunch of jobbers in ROH. So you kind of had some legitimate credibility with him. That would make the match feel a little bit more engaging. But like I said, it's not engaging because Brian Cage always loses. Hence, Ospreay hits him with a style class. And as I said with this match, 3 out of 5 for me. Great sequence, but predictable result. Cage is not a credible winner. I appreciate after the match they had Kenny Omega come out. A little controversial because he showed him got beaten down. Now he's standing up really, so there's a little bit of inconsistency. However, they had Fletcher and Takeshi come down and deliver a duo pile driver. They made the Don Callis family look strong. But like I've said, how strong is the Don Callis family if one of their members is Brian Cage, who loses over 80% of the time. And then the other thing that I will say is that I appreciate them doing something after the match because they do a lot of match to match type of thing, really. So you have to kind of say, okay, AEW Grand Slam still matters, and they showed graphics and everything, and they showed how to watch it through HBO Max. But like I've said, my concern is really what other matches are you doing. We only have 2 matches announced. The next match was Jeff Jarrett versus Claudio Castagnoli. This match I was very worried about because Claudio would look weak if he actually lost this match, and Jarrett wants to win this match. So I didn't know who was going to win that one. I'll give you that, really. But it definitely shows that Claudio is not booked well in AEW. So they did backstage segment foreshadowing Adam Page and MJF, really, because Adam Page bumps into MJF. I like that. Hobbs had a video promo, and I like what he said to Big Cass. I'm going to take you to hell, and hell is just the beginning. Very intense. That sounds very, very badass. Like I put in my notes, when Hobbs did that video promo, it says to me, that's a match they can save for the Brisbane show. That's a match they should have for the Brisbane show because you should show Brisbane a hardcore type of match. More likely they're going to have this on a random collision, but if they really wanted to do something that's going to pop people or hype people and show Hobbs as a continuation, really, he should be on that special show and beat Big Bill. So these were the promos. Then they got into the match. Jeff Jarrett does a hip toss, arm drag, Japanese underhook, arm drag. Jeff Jarrett does a figure 4. Jeff Jarrett, it's mentioned that he had over 2,400 matches in his career. He does a Russian leg sweep. Claudio wasn't doing a lot of offense or anything that stood out to me during the beginning of the match. It felt like a long, long time with Jeff Jarrett just doing a bunch of attacks on him. Claudio does the big swing and sharpshooter. Claudio does a lot of no selling. In his match, I don't like how he's booked. He's a strong man, and he's also someone with a lot of endurance, really. But it seemed like doing this match, he took a lot of hits, but he wasn't really fighting back, or he wasn't like the big bad monster that Jeff Jarrett couldn't knock down, really. That would have been a better dynamic, but they didn't really do that. They kind of did more of Claudio just, going through the motions and making Jeff Jarrett look like he had a winning chance when that probably wasn't the best thing. He almost had to be like the old man trying to fight the young, stronger guy. I believe they did something like that in the Rocky film. So, that should have been like the way they've done that, then have Claudio actually beat him because Claudio is a big, strong guy, really. That would have been a better dynamic, but they didn't execute that dynamic. Jeff Jarrett reverses encounters with a sharpshooter. Moxley hits a paradigm shift when the referee wasn't looking. Claudio hits two neutralizers on Jeff Jarrett. And also earlier in the match, Wheeler Yuta distracts Jeff Jarrett. So definitely it's like what OTR Central and other people say, that honestly it makes Claudio look weak because it shows that, okay, here's a big, strong guy who can do the Cesaro swing on the Big Show. But with Jeff Jarrett, he actually needs two interferences, the champion of the company to hit a finisher on Jeff Jarrett, and then Claudio hits two of his finishers, and that's what takes out Jeff Jarrett. And then there's also two distractions, so it makes Jeff Jarrett look monstrously strong in a way that's not believable to anybody outside of saying that he's a politician getting his way, really. It doesn't make Claudio look strong at all, really. And I think that, like I said, the old man being the underdog, trying to overcome an experienced, too strong for him talent would have been a better story, really. So I gave it a 2 out of 5. I also like MJF just dissing Jeff Jarrett after the match, because that can lead to a match at AEW Grand Slam, but more than likely they're probably going to do that at Revolution. I was also kind of saying that, they did a segment with Chris Jericho, and there's going to be, I believe, Chris Jericho and Big Bill versus the Outrunners. So that's really good. That really elevates the Outrunners. Hopefully that will be the main event of Collision. But like I've said before, could you imagine, and I'm a little worried about this, that maybe Jeff Jarrett's going to go after the ROH title, because he did appear on the Final Battle show. And I really think, to me, because they don't really care about that championship, you may see something where, instead of people like Hobbs, Dustin Rhodes, Big Bill, Brian Cage, people who can benefit for having that title, they may do Jeff Jarrett versus Chris Jericho, and then Jarrett wins, really, because they don't really care about that title. So, it's just as I said, it'll give Jarrett another title, but he's not the right person to hold that championship. But that seems like something that they would do, which would be detrimental. Next match with Ricochet versus AR Fox. Why should I care about this? Why should I care about this match? Because AR Fox always loses. So AR Fox hits a side headlock takeover, second rope cutter, corkscrew brain buster, over the top rope dive. They did the other thing too. They've been out of the ring for more than 10 seconds. That's supposed to be a disqualification, but they don't follow that. Ricochet does a hip toss, and sends AR Fox onto the ring apron that looked vicious. He teases a flip dive over the top ropes and doesn't do it, so I appreciate the heel heat. And I also appreciate Ricochet during this match. He wasn't kind of smiling or being giddy. He was actually being a lot more serious. He was kind of just being an asshole. And also just, just like being a little bit more brutal with AR Fox, really. So I appreciate that's what he needs to do, really. So he's actually improving. Like I said, he should not be giddy. He should not be engaging with the crowd unless he is playing his character, which is just being an asshole and other things like that, really. So I think that he's getting better with his character. I also want to say that I like watching an HBO match, because I like how they show the commercial. They don't do the split screen. I hate the split screen thing, because it's kind of like jarring, really, or it almost feels very cheap. Oh, well, you're watching the match, really, but it's all muted and you're hearing like an advertisement. So it kind of feels like, it's like you're trying to give you something, but then it comes off in a cheap way, really. Ricochet does a standing moonsault. And then I also said to myself, one bad thing about the match is that they said that if Swerve Strickland interferes in this match, automatically the match that they have next week of Swerve versus Ricochet in Atlanta, Georgia is canceled. So I said to myself, what would happen if you had Ricochet get on the microphone a couple of times and diss Swerve Strickland? What would happen if you had Ricochet do things like the Swerve Stomp and a couple other Swerve moves? Because that's considered disrespectful. Like, he's doing whatever he can to instigate Swerve Strickland coming down to the arena. I think you would have had a way, 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 way stronger match, and that would be a stronger story, because that would work for what you're trying to set up, really. So I think that would have worked very well. AR Fox does a leaping enziguri, a top rope 450 splash, The match is very, very 50-50, and I kind of said to myself, this match should have been 25-75, because again, when you have a wrestler like AR Fox who always loses, and he lost to Nick Wayne in Providence, why the motherfucking hell would I do something like want to watch this match? Why the hell would I want to believe in Ricochet as a character if you do something like, okay, well, AR Fox, why would you want to do something like have AR Fox go this strong or go this long with him, because it makes him look bad. It makes Ricochet look bad. You're seeing this wrestler that is lasting such a long time against Ricochet, and that's why people don't like AEW. Great best example, really, is you look at someone like Eric Young in TNA Wrestling. Imagine if he was having a 50-50 match with Sting. Sting was always booked very strongly in TNA Wrestling, a champion, other things like that. It would not be realistic. Or better example, Samoa Joe, because you see the size difference. It would just be like, you have, I don't know, you have somebody on the NXT roster, or Lexus King, Lexus King versus John Cena. In a real match, you'd have John Cena hit him with the F5, the attitude adjustment, that's the end of it. You won't have like a 50-50 or Lexus King fighting back, really, because they're so, because one's, more charismatic, one's known for championships, and the other one's not really known for that. So AR Fox is the same way. He's not known for anything. If anybody knows anything about his past and any championships, that's someone with a lot of esoteric knowledge in professional wrestling here. But you're booking him like a champion or a legitimate threat to Ricochet, but he loses all the time, really. So you can't just kind of make your loser go Super Saiyan and then be like, okay, well, if we get behind this guy, he's actually going to lose like he always loses. So that's why it doesn't really translate to the audience. They did a segment with Jon Moxley where they showed footage of the interview that they did a few days ago with Renee Paquette and the Death Riders. Like I said, Jon Moxley reminds you of a crackhead. He looks like the white Tyrone Biggums. His eyes are darting around. He's very jittery. He's speaking in an abstract way. He doesn't make eye contact with Renee like he may have like some mental illness like autism or something like that. Or, just, maybe in his head too much. Maybe just too much in his philosophy or whatever. It just doesn't translate well. Like I said to myself, does he smoke a bowl with Tony? Because, this is not that good. And I also said to myself, when they announced Chris Jericho versus the Outrunners, Chris Jericho, Big Bill, the Learning Tree versus the Outrunners, I felt that there was a bad thing that they did, because the bad thing that they did was they didn't have the Outrunners respond. That would have elevated them so much that they had that, because then you're putting so much attention on the Outrunners being these new teams or beating someone like Chris Jericho, because if they beat Chris Jericho and they pin Chris Jericho, they're going to be so elevated. There's just, as I said, there's just things that they could have done to make that better. And then if they beat Chris Jericho, then you can have the Outrunners, and the Outrunners of, I think is an Australian type of name, Outrunners versus a Hurt Syndicate at AEW Grand Slam. That would be a good match. That would be a compelling match. Before I go on to the next thing, I was saying to myself that with AR Fox versus Ricochet, I gave that a 1 out of 5 because, like I said, it's very predictable and it went on very, very long. I actually started to get, I was starting to fall asleep, really, So it took me out of the match. I felt very, very fatigued, and I think part of that was just because, I just didn't feel engaging. It felt like it went on too long, too many sequences, so I got a little gassed. And I said to myself, imagine if you had Swerve and Ricochet, and you had that at the main event. That was the main event of the Brisbane show, because that feels very main event worthy. I know they're trying to sell out tickets to all the shows that they do weekly, but it's bad that they're blowing this match at next week's show, really, and it would be way too soon to do something like a rematch in Brisbane. But yeah, it's just bad booking, really. You could have saved this. You could have saved this and made a lot of money in Australia if you made that main event, which was Ricochet versus Swerve in Australia instead of in Atlanta, Georgia next week. Next match was Wheeler Yuta versus Jay White. Worst match on the card. Um, the show is making me very, very tired at this time. And I kind of said this too, that, I think even instead of going over this match, because I was really out of it, I actually was working on some of my budgets and all the other things like that, So I was going to say that the problem is that Wheeler Yuta is just not believable. And I think that you need to do something like have him have a feud with Daniel Garcia, maybe take the title off of Daniel Garcia and give it to Yuta so Yuta looks a little bit more credible. Why don't you do something like Yuta talks on the microphone, he engages with the audience, he practices, promo skills, and you see what he can do, really. I think that would elevate him so much. Or you do something where he gets beaten down, you put Ricky Starks in the group, and then Wheeler Yuta comes back as Bryan Danielson's protege, and you show like all the training, the montages, and him redeeming and Bryan Danielson forgiving him, and you make Yuta a star that way. I think that would be good. And I also said with Jay White, I hate Jay White's voice, really. And he also looks very small body. He looks very, very skinny. So when I look at Jay White, he's just not believable to me. And I said to myself, he needs something big and bad, really. They're bringing back the Gun Club. So I think they're going to put Jay White and the Gun Club together, another team for the Trios division, or they're going to face the Death Riders. And I don't think that they've faced before. Jay White and John Moxley have faced in the Fatal 4-Way, but I don't think the Death Riders versus the Gun Club has ever happened, really. But then again, I say, that maybe if you did Jay White versus John Moxley at Grand Slam, I think I would be okay with that because it's a special show. Definitely should not ever headline a pay-per-view with Jay White. He doesn't have the charisma, I feel. He doesn't get on the microphone. He doesn't captivate people. He's not over. The most over person you have is Will Ospreay, really. But Jay White doesn't have any of that at this point. So I think for a special show, just give it to Jay White, really. Have him face Moxley, get that out of the way, just say that happened. And then it could elevate Jay White because he actually was in a title match and he had a few weeks to talk and build himself. And then he kind of takes that momentum and still talks and builds himself more going forward, really. But I think that, he's a work in progress. He's not where he should be. And it's due to bad booking because you can't just have a match with him. You can't put him in a championship spot. He doesn't look believable because he's such a skinny body. And the other thing about Jay White is that he needs to talk more. He needs to articulate himself more. He needs to figure out a way to be emphatic with the audience, get reaction from the audience, and I don't feel he does any of that. The next match was they announced that that's going to be FTR versus the Death Riders in a Mid-South Street fight at Collision. So I was a little disappointed with this because the problem is that that's a bad match. Because imagine if you did rated FTR with how I would book it. You have Powerhouse Hobbs, Anthony Bowens, and you have Willow Nightingale, a team of 6 versus the Death Riders and MJF and Marina Shafir. I was doing that in my fantasy booking for Anthony Bowens, which you guys should check out. Imagine if you did that at Double or Nothing. Or imagine if you said, you know what, we're going to save this match for the Brisbane show. Or have the Death Riders win, maybe with some interference from MJF or something like that, and then you actually, lead to a feud, and then that feud gets resolved at Double or Nothing. That would be the way to do that. And then again, you could have Chris Jericho versus Outriders main event, AEW Collision. That feels more appropriate, but I think Team FTR versus Team Death Riders, that's something that, as I would say, that's not appropriate in any regards. I just think that they're wasting a match. That could be better used for a pay-per-view, not a television special. And then I would say that they did something really bad. They had the Hurt Syndicate do a backstage promo. I wish they were on television. They would have elevated the show, really. But it was bad because MVP's dialogue was bad, and you actually heard the Spanish translation. So I kind of was saying to myself, that looks very amateur, very mediocre. And then Mercedes Moné versus Yuka Sakazaka. And I didn't even watch that match because I was kind of saying to myself, Mercedes Moné is going to win. This is going to happen. It would make no sense to put a title on Yuka if they did do that, that would just be beyond fucking stupid because it's like you have a wrestler who's a Japanese speaking wrestler. She doesn't get over big with the audience. Um, Most people don't know who the hell she is really. So do you really think that Tony is that stupid to put the title on her? That would be really, really stupid. And then the other thing that I would say is, like I said, if you had that be Britt Baker, Soraya, or Nyla Rose or somebody else that has a lot more charisma that's been built up over the years, or Willow Nightingale, who's probably the most built um, woman in the AEW women's division. She's probably the most built one in the sense of all the years being on the roster and getting attention and all that. Like she seems to be the most built one, or the most energy has gone into her, and she's done great with that. But imagine if that was her versus Mercedes Moné. You would have gotten more of a reaction, more of a response. It would have been a better thing, even if you've had them face each other before, and I believe they did. But it's just as I said, really. Yuka Sakazaka should not be main eventing a television wrestling show in the States, really. It's just bad booking. It's almost like, as I said, Shinsuke Nakamura came in. I believe it was in NXT, really. Imagine if they had him in NXT for one or 2 weeks. There's no build, and then he was ending like he was main eventing like maybe a show, maybe like one of the WWE shows, or maybe the night after WrestleMania he had a match. But there's really no build. He just is known for just spending a few weeks in NXT. Really, it would feel way too jarring, and just wouldn't really work. Really, imagine if main evented a pay per view for AEW and you had Tomohiro Ishii main event fight John Moxley at Double or Nothing. No, at All In for the AEW Championship. No build or whatever, just came out of the blue. Really, it just wouldn't really draw or sell or anything like that. So Yuka Sakazaki is not the person. Yuka Sakazaka is not the person that is believable, and it's like, what are you doing, Tony? That's just really dumb booking. And overall, that's why I gave the show a 1 out of 5. They did a lot of bad. I gave it a 2 out of 5 because there's some good things that happen, really. So this is very important. I'm going to give you the weaknesses of the show, the positives, the negatives, and the changes that need to happen. So the negatives are there was no new Grand Slam matches announced. Nobody cares about Yuta and Jay White. Yuka Sakazaka should not be main eventing Dynamite. Brian Cage, AR Fox, Wheeler Yuta are not believable wrestlers. If you're going to have a match with them, we all know how it's going to go. They're always going to lose. So why should I care if they're in a series of matches? If you give me a 50-50 match and I don't know who's going to lose, I think you have something better, especially if it's a wrestler. Like maybe you have Anthony Bowens versus, if you had Anthony Bowens versus Takeshita, or Anthony Bowens versus, Brian Cage or something like that, or Anthony Bowens versus like Wheeler Yuta, and then you have Yuta actually beat him, and then maybe they have a mini feud. If you have something that feels like, okay, two people can have a match, it's going to be 50-50, you don't know who's going to win, and then they're either stronger or nothing really changes if one wins or loses. Then that would be a better thing, really. And I said to myself, there's no Hobbs, there's no Hurt Syndicate, there's no Anthony Bowens, because Anthony Bowens and Hurt Syndicate can speak on the microphone very well, and Hobbs is just very charismatic. So I wish they were on television, but as I said, absence makes the heart grow fonder. The positives are Jeff Jarrett lost, because him facing someone for the World Heavyweight title seems like bad booking, because he's just like too old, and then also too he's slowing down a lot, so it's not believable if they make him a champion and they're like, okay, well, everybody has to job to him or work around his weaknesses, or we're going to make him a champion and beat John Moxley or be a legitimate threat to him. I just don't think that's good. Or Jeff Jarrett versus Chris Jericho, that doesn't really work, because Jeff Jarrett, he usually loses, and sometimes he wins, really, but he's not he's not a former AEW champion like Chris Jericho, so it does feel a little unrealistic if they have a match and then he loses, Jeff Jarrett, and then he loses, and Chris Jericho loses to Jeff Jarrett. I'm happy they announced collision matches. They built into the Atlanta Georgia show. Uh, they did mention Grand Slam a couple of times in Revolution, so I really appreciate their building of different events, really, because that if you want to make money, that's what you do. Ricochet, he's featured a lot better. I really liked how he improved on not being silly, but just being unapologetic sociopath. He needs to embrace that a lot more, even if he is and go in his own direction. Like try to be different from MJF. Do some books, read some books, or make some notes, or do some like chat GPT and kind of be like, okay, this is how we're going to like this is how we're going to book these matches. This is what we're going to do to make sure Ricochet can be a heel character, not be a copycat of MJF, because nobody really wants to see that. But I do appreciate him being a lot more serious, not chuckling or having too much fun with the audience, or kind of like smiling or whatever. He really played a more serious character, and he needs to go in that direction a lot more. The changes that should happen based on the show is that um, every main event should have two wrestlers that we know about. Like I said, if you had Saraya or Britt Baker or Tony Storm and Ryan May or Anna Jay or somebody else, really, that's better than Yuka Sakazako or Will Nightingale or Chris Statlander. That would have been way better. They should announce more Grand Slam matches. Jay White needs to be more talkative, and you need to make him a lot more engaging. Um, Make more unpredictable matches, not former champion or somebody with a strong winning streak or somebody super charismatic versus somebody who loses all the time, really. Because then again, it's like, why should I watch? Um, why should I watch these matches? Why should I watch, Wheeler Yuta? Why should I watch a lot of these matches I saw tonight? Because, like, I think three or four of them, you kind of knew who's going to lose. So, when it becomes predictable, people just tune out because they're like, oh, well, there's no suspense. There's no sense of we don't know what's going to happen next, really. So that's an issue. So that's all I have to say about the show. It was definitely very. I'll give it an A for abysmal. Otherwise, it was just not a good show. Um, and like I said, if you have like almost every match, you know who's going to win because it's very obvious because they're facing people who lose all the time. And you have a champion that you want to look strong, or a wrestler that you like that you want to look strong, or a wrestler that looks like they're legit, like Brian Cage, versus a person who's not as legitimate, like Adam Cole with his scrawny like arms and all that. People wouldn't want to see that match because it's like, oh well, it's too predictable. And if you have like somebody else try to go down to wrestler's level, um, you're not going to get that far really because you're not establishing believability and a sense of disbelief really, which AEW seems to struggle to do all the time.